you have this expectation, this picture in your mind of what your family is going to be like, right? And either you are going through or you receive that diagnosis of whatever it is. And that dream, that picture, that beautiful expectation is then shattered into a million pieces, right? And it's life altering. And we always like to remind people, it's not, your child has not changed, but your perception of them has, right? Your expectation of what their life is going to be like has changed irrevocably. And what are you going to do at that point? Well, when you break something, you think that you're supposed to glue it back together. No, we're telling you that that's not what you're supposed to do in this case. In this case, you need to find some new material and you need to build a new dream.
Ever feel like you suck at this job? Motherhood, I mean. Have too much anxiety and not enough patience? Too much yelling, not enough play? There's no manual, no village, no guarantees. The stakes are high. We want so badly to get it right. But this is survival mode. We're just trying to make it to bedtime. So if you're full of mom guilt, your temper scares you, you feel like you're screwing everything up, and you're afraid to admit any of those things out loud, this podcast is for you. This is Failing Motherhood. I'm Danielle Bettman, and each week we'll chat with a mom ready to be real, sharing her insecurities, her fears, her failures, and her wins. We do not have it all figured out. That's not the goal. The goal is to remind you, you are the mom your kids need. They need what you have, you are good enough, and you're not alone. I hope you pop in earbuds, somehow sneak away, and get ready to hear some hope from the trenches. You belong here, friend. We're so glad you're here. Hey, it's Danielle. Today I am sitting down with Brittney and Shannon, 2 out of the 4 moms of Moms Talk Autism, a podcast where good friends share their journeys, figuring out in real time how to best support their kids and themselves, discussing school, family balance, siblings, grief, therapies, social issues, behaviors, delays, diagnosis advocacy, marriage, and so much more. Our conversation today highlights their individual stories. Brittney with 4 kids, 2 with autism, both with very different needs, and Shannon with an 18-year-old and a 10-year-old daughter with autism. And they offer honesty, wisdom, and advice for other parents in the trenches with them, where there's no rule book and a lot of pressure, spanning from things like protecting your peace, finding your people, and building a new dream. As we wrap up, they reflect on the beautiful ways that they have changed as people as a result of parenting their kids, and it's those moments of gratitude that we all can't get enough of. So enjoy my conversation with Brittney and Shannon. Welcome to Failing Motherhood. My name is Danielle Bettman. On today's episode, I am joined by Brittney and Shannon from Moms Talk Autism. Thank you guys so much for being here. I feel like we just talked because I was on your podcast like a week or 2 ago. So we just get to swap and see each other again, which is really, really fun. So thanks for taking the time to share your stories and your advice with my listeners. So go ahead, if you wouldn't mind. Who are you? Who's in your family?
We both point at each other at the same time. Okay, I'll go first. I'm Shannon Corza. I am 41, right, Brittney? I think I'm 41.
Yep, you are.
I live in Tucson, Arizona with my husband, Jay. He is retired law enforcement, now a flight paramedic, and my 2 wonderful daughters who are losing their minds in the front room right now, one of which is 18, Maya, and the other which is just 9, who is Gracie. And Gracie is my neurospicy child.
And I am Brittney Crabtree. I live in the Sacramento area, California. We were just comparing temperatures.
Mm-hmm.
We're up there today as well. And I live with my husband, Doug. We've been married for, it'll be 22 years in a couple of months, which is crazy. And I have 4 kids. So my oldest will be 20 next week. And that is a whole nother ball game that I am not prepared for, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. So he is currently going to, community college and working here, living at home. My 17-year-old son, Austin, is autistic and non-speaking, quite profound, and needs a lot of support and help. So he'll be with us to the end, as we say. And then I've got Tyler, who is 16, and he is going to be a junior in high school coming up in the fall here. He's really into cross country and track and is kind of my strong silent one he's a man of few words, which is great. I love him. And then Ruby, my 10-year-old little girl, our little bonus at the end, is our princess, and she's also autistic. She is able to be at a general education elementary school with her peers, but then she's like pulled out for certain classes in certain parts of her day. She kind of does like a hybrid approach where she's a special needs class and then she's also part of a general education class. And that works well for her. Austin is in a private autism school nearby, and they also have other neurodiverse diagnoses there, but mainly autism. And that's a better fit for him. So that's my family.
Perfect. And Brittney, will you go ahead and introduce the other two moms that are a part of Moms Talk Autism as well?
Yeah, there's 4 of us. We all live in different parts of the U.S. So yeah, Shannon's in Arizona. I'm in California. Jean, our sweet little Jean, is recently divorced and doing single mom life. So that's a whole nother ballgame for her. She is in Austin, Texas, and she has 2 kids. And Tosh, Tosh, we call her, is in the Portland, Oregon area. She lives in Washington State, just over the border. And she also has 2 children. So that's our group.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure the question you always get asked, which I have to ask, is how did you guys initially connect?
Go ahead, Shannon. You tell the story.
Oh, okay. Well, we actually met during the pandemic on Instagram, which is kind of wild. And we were in one big group Instagram chat, and it kind of like whittled down. Like some of us stuck it out, others didn't. And we ended up on Marco Polo. So we always say that they should be a sponsor of our podcast because we talk about them all the time, Marco Polo. But, it was a huge lifeline for us during the pandemic, and being able to see each other while we were talking and stay in touch with one another and have moms who really understood what our life was like, especially in such a lonely time as the pandemic when you couldn't even leave your home, so trying to, everybody's trying to homeschool their kids, and we're trying to keep IEPs together at home. And it was a little bit of a nightmare. So we ended up planning a girls' trip, and we all went to the Pacific Northwest, and we were like, let's start a podcast. And we did.
This sounds like a great idea.
And what was the vision for the podcast? How would you describe it for people who haven't heard of it?
So it really started out as we all had these common stories of just feeling really alone in the beginning of the diagnosis. And, we all feel like we have great families, for the most part, and family is amazing and they love you and they try to understand as much as they can. So do your friends. But until you really live a life with, a child with exceptional needs, you can't truly understand what it's like and the isolation that comes along with that sometimes. And so we just really wanted other parents to be able to feel that they were not alone. Like, we get you, we see you, we know exactly what you're going through. And like, there's hope out there. There are people out there who really understand you, who love you. And it's kind of like, we really wanted it to be like, grab your cup of coffee, pop on the podcast, and let's talk. Let's talk about life, and let's talk about the things that we may not tell other people because they don't get it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So needed.
Mm-hmm.
So needed. And nobody could talk about it like you can, for sure. When you're in the trenches, like nobody can disclaim your personal experience. And I think it's so critical to find your people and know you're not alone. There's so much mental health that comes from just that solidarity aspect, for sure.
Definitely.
Has there been like a favorite, most listened to episode or a conversation that like rose to the top for you guys personally?
We have a couple that come to mind. Shannon, feel free to jump in too. But we recently recorded an episode with Ashley Lewis. of Lewis Empire. She is on social media quite prominently. And her daughter is 14 and has gone through, the process of like puberty and like starting her cycle and all those like lovely things you do when you become a teenager and you're a female. And we both have daughters who are autistic. Presley's also autistic. And she was able to just kind of answer questions and talk us through what it's like to have a daughter start her cycle, and be neurodivergent. And that, as she says on her platform, and it comes up quite often on ours too, that people really have that question because that's a big life change, as the three of us know.
It is.
And to be able to go through that, but maybe not be able to explain it in the way you would do a typical child, or for them to maybe even comprehend fully what's happening at their current state. That was a huge piece. And we need to continue to keep talking about it, and we will. We hope to have Ashley on again to talk about it and just our own experiences as it happens with our children, our daughters. That's a big one. And then we get a lot of feedback about anything with like what we wish we would have known. Maybe like early diagnosis, looking back, not necessarily regrets or like, oh, I screwed this all up. But if I had known this, maybe I would have done this instead. Maybe this part would have gone a little smoother, things like that.
Yeah. Just benefiting from that hindsight. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I think the other one that gets a lot of traction has to do with siblings and the effect that this life has on the neurotypical siblings. We had a wonderful guest on, and then my oldest actually got on that episode also, just to have a really honest conversation. A lot of special needs parents, we have a lot of guilt with our neurotypical children and the responsibility that they get thrust into. They have to grow up a little faster, than the average kiddo. And also, without taking it too dark here, what happens when we're gone? Like, for the most part, our, neurodivergent kiddos are now our other children's responsibility in some way, shape, or form. So that one resonates a lot for parents because they have a lot of questions on maybe what they can do differently, in their home. And we are by no means, we say literally every episode, we give a disclaimer where we're like, we are not experts. We are trying to figure out our lives. So we're just kind of here to share how we're winging it and what works for us. But yeah, that one is another one that's really popular.
Well, that makes sense completely. Yeah. And that was a perfect segue because typically the way that I start my interviews is I kind of to have a prerequisite to pre-qualify, who I bring on the podcast. We know it's called Failing Motherhood, but anybody we don't know, we typically tend to put them on a pedestal that they have their life together and they have it all figured out. So I like to ask, have you ever felt like you were failing motherhood?
Just this minute or the last hour
Really?
or today? How many times have I felt that way? Yes.
What does that mean to you?
We feel that way a lot. For me, just within our group dynamic, I have, twice as many children as anyone else. I have 4. Everyone else has 2. So automatically, I feel like I'm at a disadvantage that way, just dividing my time evenly between everyone. And let's be honest, it's not even. That's not how it works. That's not life. Right. So it's a constant juggling act of, okay, I need to focus on this child right now for this, for this period of time, whatever that is. And these other kids they'll be okay. I'm there, but maybe you're going to have to figure things out on your own a little bit. Okay. That's good for you too. And then you switch and it's like, okay, well, man, I've really put a lot of effort into these 2 for this particular reason for whatever amount of time. Man, this one I haven't talked to or really focused on in my boys are older. So I don't, they don't typically talk to me either. Right. So like, I really haven't spent any time with this one in a couple of days. Man, maybe I should do a check-in. So it's just this constant like back and forth. You feel like you're watching a tennis match, but there's like 4 courts at once. And so you're just, your head's swiveling back and forth and back and forth. So that's a lot of, that can feel like failure if you feel like you're neglecting, a child or you're not paying attention enough to a particular child. They all have needs. They all need stuff. And my neurotypical kids, so my 20-year-old and my 16-year-olds, they have learned through this process to become independent. If there's one thing we can say for these siblings of neurodivergent kids is they grow up faster sometimes in some ways. They really do. And they learn to become little adults and really have to take on more responsibility than some of their peers in some avenues of life. So I find them not coming to me when they are struggling with something because they don't want to be a burden. And then that automatically makes me as a mom feel bad that I am not paying attention to them enough, or I'm maybe not in tune enough, or they don't feel comfortable talking to me, or blah. I can feel guilty about all sorts of things for all sorts of reasons, right?
Yep.
And I mean, we're really good at that as women. So that's hard. It's hard to not sometimes go to bed at night and be like, man, I am really not doing a good job with these kids right now. So that's probably my biggest one.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I got on Marco Polo just yesterday talking to Brittany about how I'm like, oh my God, I'm failing. Like, I feel so out of alignment with what I wanted for this summer, and I got into real estate a couple years ago, and I literally got into real estate so that we could invest income for Gracie's future because we just don't know like what it's going to look like. And so the reason I got into it was to take care of her. But then I really, Maya's moving out at the end of the summer. She's going to college, she's going to be in a dorm. And so I really wanted to be home this summer. Like I'm going to tone things down and I'm going to spend more time at home and be around my girls. And it just so happens I had, 3 closings in the last week and a half. And so I'm out of the house and I've got a buyer from out of state who I showed, 12 homes this weekend. And I'm like, I just want to be home. Like I promised myself I would be home this summer, and then everything is happening right now where it just has to be right now. And I'm telling Brittany, I'm doing this because I need it to take care of Gracie. I have to have this, but then it's not in alignment with the things that I set forth, And so just trying to figure it, and that's just one of many ways, that I feel.
And I think that's super relatable, even if you don't have neurodivergent children. And I love that in this Marco Polo that Shannon was talking, I remember this conversation. She said, I don't have an answer and I'm not expecting one, but I just need to talk it out because this is not lining up the way I planned it to be, right? It's all about expectation versus reality for anyone. And, that's the whole point of the podcast. And that's the whole point of us finding that community around you, especially people who maybe have kids with special needs or have family members with special needs, is they're going to be able to understand, and you are able to talk it through with somebody else. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have all the answers, but you're going to have somebody who can really empathize.
Yeah. So critical, especially when there is no solution, really. Yeah. You're stuck in that dichotomy between the expectation and the reality, like you said, but also the long term and the short term, and who you could be as a parent or want to be and have to be right now, or the capacity that you currently are dealing with, and the things that are so out of your control.
Like your own children's autonomy. Yeah. You really don't have a lot of control over that, especially as they get older. Just going to throw that one out there.
Yes. There's only becomes more nuanced, more complicated ways to feel like you're falling short, I'm sure. Yeah. Well, that's light and fluffy.
How can we turn this around? I don't know.
I mean, that's the reality again. We wish that it was cupcakes and rainbows, and we know it's very much not. And the more we feel like the cupcakes and rainbows toxic positivity is forced onto us, the more misunderstood we feel, the more isolated and alone we feel. So it's always, I think, very comforting to know you're not the only one having a bad week. You're not the only one staying up late worrying. You're not the only one that wishes they could just vent to a friend, and be able to have that opportunity still is really special. So building off of that, I'd love to hear a little bit more of your own stories, individually, kind of what that has looked like as you have found diagnosis and beyond. And I know that could take up a whole podcast in and of itself for each one of those stories. So when given the platform, what are some of the highlights that it would just be painting the picture of the diversity that it can look like to be raising, kids on the spectrum like this? Brittany, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah. So starting off, I have an interesting dynamic because I do have 2 children who have both been diagnosed with the same thing, but it presents itself very, very differently in each of them. And that's not only because of their age or their gender, but because of their ability or the the severity of their diagnosis. Even the way they were diagnosed is vastly different because of the changes and the updates that have happened over the last decade, really, in the autism world. So Austin was diagnosed. He's never spoken. Is that the right word, right verb? I don't know. He's never been verbal, whatever. Yeah. So he's never really talked to us before verbally. So you start being concerned about that at a very young age, 18 months, 2 years, around there. And what tends to happen with these diagnoses of autism is they check speech first, they check hearing, because it's a communication issue usually at first. So we had all that checked out. Everything looked great. Very quickly, with some excellent doctors in our area, they diagnosed him with autism. And I knew something was wrong. Maybe I didn't have necessarily the word. I knew what autism was in theory on paper. I literally have a degree in childhood psychology. I mean, I've taken classes on this, but it didn't really, I didn't have a lot of firsthand experience. So it rocked my world. Even having that background, it rocked my world. And so it was a slew of 40-hour-a-week therapy days for him. I mean, he was a full-time 2-year-old with a full-time job, basically. And which meant I had a full-time job. I had, a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old and a kid who had therapists in my house all day long, every day. And it was a lot. It was exhausting. Honestly, I have blocked a lot of it out. I don't remember a lot. And I think that's typical for a lot of, as we get older, we just forget all those early years where you're just physically exhausted all the time. And as things progressed with him and he grew older, it became very clear that things weren't going to, quote, get better, or he wasn't going to grow out of it. This was going to be something that was going to be with him forever. And it continues. Where things really took a turn for us was puberty for Austin. And of course, that paired nicely with the pandemic for him. We got a double whammy there. So services were scarce. It was very difficult to get extra help. We did all of the physical things, checking again to make sure we weren't dealing with hormonal imbalances, all sorts of stuff. But for Austin, where he is so limited with his communication, and then all of these hormones and these body changes are happening, it manifested itself in a lot of anger and aggression. And for him, that was not only aggression towards other people, even those he loves the most, like mom and dad, but also himself. So he hurts himself also. And it is extremely gut-wrenching. I don't know how else to describe it. It kills me to see him hurt himself and then try to hurt me. Only because he's frustrated. He doesn't know how to tell me what he needs. And we've tried all the things, everybody, and we'll continue to keep trying all the things. But I'd almost rather, I've said this before, I'd almost rather have him hit me than hit himself. I would, because I can at least have a little bit of control and try to block or defend or whatever. And it's really, really difficult. So that's a dynamic that is, completely shifted and changed our family, having people in our home, having friends over. What do we do when he starts getting aggressive? My daughter will scatter. She knows, that's not normal. that's not typical family life. So that's a really significant difference, even with myself amongst, the other girls in Moms Talk Autism. They've got some aggression too, but I've got the one who's, post-puberty at this point. So it's really tough. And then with Ruby, it manifested itself. It was a lot harder when she was a toddler, because she knew she could speak, she could communicate, but she would get frustrated really, really fast. And so it was a lot of, those typical 2 and 3-year-old meltdowns would happen, but it was extreme. And that can bring a lot of guilt on with yourself, but it also brings a lot of judgment, because you've got this little 2 and 3-year-old having a complete meltdown in a parking lot for an hour. I'm not exaggerating. And you get a lot of, judgmental looks of why you need to be firm with this kid, or whatever, pick your poison of comments I've heard over the years, or just strangers being really inappropriate. And as she's grown older, though, and she's learned to communicate more, she still struggles a lot. Transitions are really, really hard for her still as a 10-year-old. she's been able to understand, and we've been able to find techniques that help her. Now, I'm gearing up for that puberty phase again, knowing what I went through with my son. I am not expecting it to be the same, and it will not be the same, I guarantee you, but it is going to be difficult again. And so I am trying to mentally prepare myself and talk to people maybe who have gone through it, like Ashley and others, and especially people maybe who've gone through it recently, so it's fresh for them, and try to help her understand the changes that are going to be happening to her body. I didn't even understand it at 13, 14. Are you kidding me? Like, I can't imagine. So yeah, that's kind of the dynamic of my family and the diagnosis process. The way that we even diagnosed Austin with the doctors and the hoops you jump through and the requirements, even though they were both in the state of California, it was done very differently, which is kind of interesting. It's probably even different again now. They were both diagnosed around the age 2 and 3, but it's just kind of fascinating how even the medical world has changed and is kind of honing in on how to help our kids and help ourselves with the early diagnosis. So,
which is so interesting and so needed too,
yeah,
because we're constantly getting new information about this. And it makes sense that our modalities then would change with that pace. And I'm glad that there has been that progression, but I'm sure that it's just confusing because every parent is kind of making it up as they go.
We sure are. And you feel a little bit like a guinea pig or a lab rat, especially if you have to dive into the world of prescription medications or even supplements. You do feel like a lab rat. Your child feels like a lab rat. And that is also another level of like, man, I feel like I have a lot of responsibility on my shoulders. And if I screw this up, I'm going to feel really, really guilty about it. But then you have to try. You get desperate enough or things get bad enough where you have to look at it. Yeah, that's also a constant struggle in our house.
Oh, that makes sense. And quick last question for you, and then we'll move into Shannon's story. What were the symptoms you recognized that ended up, bringing you into that round 2 with Ruby?
With her diagnosis? Yeah. So the beautiful thing about having one of those silver linings of having a child that has already been diagnosed and having 3 boys, I had raised or was raising 3 other children. I knew what to look for. If Ruby had been my oldest, I don't think I would have pushed or known to look as quickly. I would have thought I would have had a very strong-willed child maybe, or that, yeah, we were delayed in speech, but she would, quote, catch up, things like that. But because I knew we don't know a lot about autism and what causes it or what all the framework is, but we do know that there is a strong genetic component to it. And if you have one child that's diagnosed with autism, your chances of having another increase quite a little bit. So I knew that that was a possibility. And so I really pushed to have her tested early. And it was because of the communication. It was the elevated temper tantrums and these meltdowns that, a typical 2-year-old has them often, but the length and the severity of them was more than I thought was appropriate for her age. And knowing those things and already having some of those early intervention pieces in place with speech, I just really pushed to get that diagnosis or to at least have her tested. And sure enough, my instincts were correct. And so that's something I really try to emphasize we all do on our podcast is if your mama gut is telling you something, even if every professional you talk to is saying no, or your parents or your spouse or whatever is saying, I don't know, you do it. The absolute worst thing that's going to happen is you might have to pay for some testing. And maybe you get a diagnosis, but then you have a diagnosis and then there's tools that open up to you with that diagnosis that are going to help you. And that's so key. Maybe you don't get a diagnosis. Okay. Then you can eliminate that maybe, and then you can move forward and look at other things. In the end, it's only going to empower you and help your child. I know it's scary, but it's really, really important that you do that if that's what your mama gut is telling you. And so that's what I tried to do. I try to do all the time with my kids.
Yeah, it's just information.
Information is power.
The more information, the better. Yes, absolutely. No, thank you for sharing that level of detail. Appreciate it. Here's the deal. If your child is sensitive and smart, yet loses it is clingy or aggressive with you at home. They can go 0 to 60 over the smallest things, like when they just don't get their way. Nothing changes their mind, and they can't seem to get over it. And you know what you're doing isn't working, and siblings are starting to suffer. You could go to therapy yourself and take your child to therapy and follow all the experts and ask your family and friends for advice and take a course and set up a calm down corner and read all the parenting books and still feel defeated. It's time. It's time to learn the missing pieces of invaluable insight about their temperament that unlocks compassion in you and understanding of how to work with the way they're wired. It's time to communicate in new ways, like a hostage negotiator, to get through to them and cultivate cooperation with confidence. And it's time to eliminate the behaviors that are working to gain control and attention at their root, rather than playing whack-a-mole. Calm and Confident, the masterclass, is for you. There, you will master the kind and firm approach your strong-willed child needs without crushing their spirit or walking on eggshells. In this free training, I share the 4 critical kind and firm scripts that unlock cooperation in every situation, how to eliminate behaviors at their root, and the path to solidifying the open and honest relationship that you want to have with your child down the road. So go to parentingwholeheartedly.com/confident to access this exclusive on-demand training immediately. That's parentingwholeheartedly.com/confident. That link will be in the show notes. So Shannon, your turn.
My turn. So, my girls had a pretty big age gap. Maya was 9.5 when I had Gracie. And so it's like I raised another child before. So I knew what it was, quote, supposed to be like, but it had also been a very long time. So, I think our biggest sign with Gracie that there was something going on was she was not responding to her name. So you would call her and she wouldn't even turn her head. We also started seeing some regression around her first birthday, where she would have skills or have a certain word, and then all of a sudden, it would be gone. That was kind of like between 12 and 18 months. And so we talked to her pediatrician about it, at that 12-month visit, and come to find out later, we found out he actually had a son who was autistic. So he was very open to testing and going through all of that. And, we were lucky enough to get started with early intervention at 18 months. And then comes all the therapies, right? So it was, before I had Gracie, I worked full-time in the mortgage industry. My husband was in law enforcement. I'd always been a working mom. I had always planned to be a working mom. That was never even a question. Then I will say, as I got closer to the end of my pregnancy, my husband was a little weary about putting our new baby in childcare. He's a law enforcement officer, so they see a lot of things. And so we did decide at that time that I was going to stay home with Gracie. So, I was very blessed because now at this time, well, at least I have the time because we're going to live in our car because we have to drive all over Tucson for these therapies, because they're not on our side of town. But then things changed a lot because I had had this vision of what it was going to look like being a stay-at-home mom. And this was not it, right? Like living in my car, doing all of these therapies, it essentially, for us anyway, removed the option of having another child. We decided at that point, if I were to have another child, that baby would live in my car with me all week. Like this baby's going to sit in a car seat, for 50% of its day. It just at that point was a pretty life altering, decision. So we decided not to have any more kids. And a lot like Brittney, it's just changed the way that we have to do a lot of things. Gracie is, she falls somewhere in between Ruby and Austin. She does have moments where she's aggressive, and it mostly stems from frustration, from not being able to get what she wants or needs across. She does have words. Gracie's in this weird gray area where it's she's not non-speaking, but she's not speaking. So she has words, but she has to be very motivated to use them. She will not use them for everyone. So she's a little, tricky on who she'll give up the words to. So there can be some frustration that stems from not being able to get her point across. We took the kids on vacation last summer over Gracie's birthday, and it becomes very obvious when Gracie needs to be removed from a situation. And it's not like a typical kid where you can like negotiate a little bit, right? Like, we're going to do 5 more minutes at the beach and then we'll go do this. It is a hard stop. It is a nope, this is the moment in time and we are done and we will move along. And that shows itself in many areas. We may be at a friend's house for a barbecue or a birthday party, and then all of a sudden we're in the car and we're leaving. Or we take 2 cars and we know that one of us is leaving when Gracie's done and the other 2 can stay. It's changed. We do a lot more things out of our house now instead of going to other people's houses. We invite people over because it's her comfort zone. It has reduced the people that we allow into our lives. Like, if you cannot come into our home with an open mind and see our child the way that we see her, you're not coming into our home. And so that can be isolating. It can change the way that you do a lot of things. And so I think the hardest things have been to get past the vision that you thought you were going to have in your life and readjust to your new expectations. And I think when it was going through the diagnosis for me, there was a ton of fear for me. And I had never had anyone autistic in my life before. So I didn't know what that was going to look like. And as I sit there now, in hindsight is 2020, and I have the experience, I do tell people the fear stemmed from me worrying that I was not going to be able to be enough. I wasn't going to be able to show up for her in the way that she needed. I wasn't going to know what to do. I was going to fail in some way, shape, or form. And Gracie herself didn't change, right? Like, when we got the diagnosis, she was still exactly the same person she was before we had the appointment. And I do want to touch on something that Brittney said, and that was, the diagnosis phase can be extremely difficult. Wait lists for specialists are insane. We were on a 9-month wait list for my daughter to see a developmental pediatrician. There was 2 of them in Tucson at the time. And, by the time we got to that appointment, this woman sat with my daughter for 30 minutes and decided she wasn't autistic enough for a diagnosis, because she maintains eye contact. So, clearly she can't be autistic, right? And like Brittney said, I ended up finding a functional medicine doctor, and we went to see them, and she was board certified. But she's done some, studying in China. She had done a lot of other things, and paid a significant amount of money for an appointment with her. And she spent 4 hours with my daughter. She was on the floor with my daughter, building blocks with her. She was talking to Jay and I about our medical histories and things in our lives. And we walked away the next day with a diagnosis. So I think, going back to just following your gut and taking the time. And I think a lot of parents put off testing, and they put off testing because they're afraid. It's understandable. I was absolutely petrified going through this, so I don't ever want anybody to feel bad. But I don't think that good things ever come out of making decisions based on fear. And I didn't want Gracie to be labeled. I didn't want her to have a designation that said who she was. But with that diagnosis, like Brittney said, a lot of tools opened for her that she would not have received otherwise. And ultimately, it has been the best decision.
Well, thank you for speaking directly to the parent that I'm sure comes across your guys' feed with trepidation of I don't know if this applies to me yet. I don't want it to, or maybe it does, and I'm scared, because there's a world of understandable reactions and valid emotions that come with being a parent to someone who you are figuring out. And don't invalidate your own experience by just trying to double down and focus on your kid, because that does a disservice to them too, without being able to really understand what's going on with you. And sometimes it takes being able to hear the words of someone else put into words what you don't have words for yet. And I think that's what hearing stories often does, is it brings to the surface some of the things that we're maybe not ready to think about or, make peace with yet. So that's exactly kind of what you've done. And if you would elaborate on speaking to other parents that are in the trenches with you, where you know that they feel misunderstood, you know they feel alone, what are some of the biggest things that have made the difference for you that you would advocate and encourage them to do?
I think it is important to remember, we had this in our intro, and Shannon touched on it briefly. You have this expectation, this picture in your mind of what your family is going to be like, right? And either you are going through or you receive that diagnosis of whatever it is. And that dream, that picture, that beautiful expectation is then shattered into a million pieces, right? And it's life altering. And we always like to remind people, it's not, your child has not changed, but your perception of them has, right? Your expectation of what their life is going to be like has changed irrevocably. And what are you going to do at that point? Well, when you break something, you think that you're supposed to glue it back together. No, we're telling you that that's not what you're supposed to do in this case. In this case, you need to find some new material and you need to build a new dream. And that is, once you can wrap your head around that concept, there is an empowerment or a feeling of, I don't know, lightness is the wrong word, but you feel empowered and you feel energized and you're ready to begin the work, right? And it's not easy and you have to make it up a lot, like you said, and that our podcast and your podcast and other, avenues out there, whether that's social media or in your local community, those are all pieces that are going to help you make that new dream. We don't have all the answers here for us, but we can share our experiences, and that can be maybe one piece that you can add to your new expectation, your new dream, your new picture of your family. And we're still trying to make ours up too. Like, we have holes in our picture too. And you can't even rely on your own childhood necessarily, unless you had a sibling or you grew up with somebody who was neurodivergent. You don't even have that to look back on. So we tend to parent or not parent like our own, mother and father or whoever you grew up with on purpose. Like you make that conscious decision, like, oh, this really worked for me. I'm going to do it just like this because my parents did this part really great. Or, man, my parents were really, really bad at that. I'm going to do the opposite of what they did. Like, you compare yourself and you parent accordingly. And you can't do that if you have a child with a diagnosis necessarily. You have to make it up. You have to literally start from ground zero. And so I think that's really, really important to remember and to keep in mind. It's not about fitting your family into this neurotypical 2.5 kids with a dog with a white picket fence, and that's not what's on the table for you. You get to make up your own thing, and it might actually be better. It might. I think it's worth considering, and I think it's worth keeping in the back of your mind. And then the last thing I'll say is, because you have to go through that process, when that picture is dropped and it shatters, you need to allow yourself to grieve. It is the death of that expectation. And it is a death. It needs to be treated as such with your emotions. And you are allowed to go through the grief process. And we have a whole series on that. That's another one that we haven't mentioned that we think is really, really important to listen to. You're going to go through possible stages of denial, anger, all of those things. And then you're going to come out the other side and you're going to be in a better place to raise your child and to help your family. And then the next hurdle is going to come your way, and you're going to have to cycle through that grief cycle again and again and again and again. And it doesn't necessarily get easier, but you do get better at it. Maybe you're able to cycle through that anger piece a little faster this round, or whatever it is. So I am preaching to the choir here. Like, Shannon and I need to hear this just as much as all of you do. Like, we have to remind ourselves constantly. And that's why it's so good to have those friends out there who can be like, you know what? I think you're grieving a little bit on this one. Maybe you give yourself a little grace, like chill out a little bit, take a step back. We need those people in our lives to say that to us.
For sure. What would you add, Shannon?
Well, I'm just over here like Brittney didn't say, you need to diversify your friendship portfolio, because that's Brittney's key line that she says every time.
I was waiting for someone else to say it.
I think, to steal from Brittany's key line that she likes to drop, you do have to find people that understand you. And I think if there were some things that I wish I would have known back then, it would have been plug into those, Gracie went to a special needs preschool that's through the school district. Plug into those parents, get to know those parents, because those are going to be your humans. They're going to understand. When they get into elementary school, plug into those parents and get to know them. Gracie's school just this year started doing a quarterly picnic they call it the bridge department. Those are, some of the special needs kiddos. And, once a quarter, we go an hour early and we meet, in the center area of the school, and we all bring our lunch and we have like a picnic together with the kids there. And if you can't do that, like if you're just not there yet, start finding your people on social media. Like if I would not have been on Instagram, I would not have gotten to know any of these 3 women. And I have no idea what my life would look like right now.
There's lots of really great places on there.
Yeah.
There's lots of bad stuff too.
There are a lot of bad things. So
like weed it out, but there's lots of really, really good stuff on there. Yeah.
Yeah. Protect your peace. I had to leave a lot of Facebook groups going through the diagnosis. The first thing I did was join all the Facebook groups because I felt like I needed to learn everything. And then I'm like, whoa, every other post in this group is negative, and I can't do this right now.
I'm out.
Yeah. I think the other thing is, there were nights when Gracie was diagnosed where I would put her to sleep and I would literally cry over her bed. And I would pray and I didn't know what life was going to look like. And I wanted to be, so good for her. And I was thinking about it last night because I have been trying very hard. I am a high anxiety human. I am a control freak, people. Welcome to my world.
Yeah.
I've been trying to take a little more time for myself. And I was like, I'm going to go out in the backyard because it's the only time it's not 9 million degrees. It's like 7 p.m. And I'm going to do a little bit of breath work, a little bit of meditation. And one of the meditations, it has to be led because I'm a control freak. So my brain will go in every direction. So it has to be.
I hear you on that.
Yeah, it has to be a led meditation.
Same.
But it was all about, gratitude. And as I'm sitting there, the first thing, because they want the first thing that pops into your mind, and it was a picture of last night. Gracie was laying on the couch and she was like kind of like snuggling with her iPad, and she was watching something that was funny. So she was like giggling, and she's got the best giggle. And, Maya had come over and was like tickling her feet. And like that picture was in my head. And I was so thankful for it. And I was thinking, because I was no longer following my led meditation, that if I would have seen this picture then, I would not have been as terrified. And I think that we live in a world where sometimes we go to worst case scenario and we forget that that's not necessarily the way that things are going to end up. And so if you're going through something like this, it's not going to relate right now because you are going to be in fear and you are going to be in that place. But just know that what comes, 3, 4, 5 years later is not what you're so worried about. Like there is all of this positive stuff on the other side that could be waiting there for you. And you don't have to be the person that worries about everything that could go wrong, in that 5-6 year span. And you could save yourself a lot of tears and anxiety and heartache in savoring those moments when they pop up. Like just savor them. And that's whether you're a neurotypical, neurodiverse, like those are the moments, those are the core memories. So you just have to really savor them as they come.
Oh, I think we're more in tune with that. And we really, really celebrate those little teeny tiny victories. If that's something that I've learned from this, that's a huge component of it. And I just want to piggyback really quick on the diversifying your friendship portfolio. So, find those.
She can't help herself, guys.
I can't help myself. If you, find those other moms who are in that preschool group or are in the special needs, whatever, that's great. But you can also train your people. Okay. Like if
they're willing to be trained.
But that's the thing. You find the ones who are willing and you hold on to those people.
Mm-hmm.
My parents are 100% on board. My brother has 5 children of his own, all neurotypical, very busy job, life in a different state. He flies down every year to stay with my family, my kids, for one weekend to give me a break. He's in, okay? He's all the way in. And we are so grateful for him and his wife for willing to take that time and that energy for him to do that. And it is not easy. Like, remember, aggression, like it's not easy, but he does that. Find those people. It doesn't necessarily have to be a family member. I have some friends who are willingly coming over to my house and dealing with all of our stuff so I can take my husband out for his birthday, things like that. So you can train them too. It's a lot of work on your part and you have to be on board too, but they can train themselves and then they can work with you to be trained as well.
You guys just concentrated so much good advice into like 5 minutes. That was amazing.
Keep going.
I know there's plenty more where that came from for sure. And so much of it translates too. And it's almost like a tarot card, like take what you need, leave the rest. Like, it's all up to your interpretation of what you needed to hear right now, whatever phase you're in, whatever season you're in of parenting. It's pretty universal because you do need to let unsolicited feedback go. You do need to be able to embrace your people that are all in and take some of the pressure off yourself to prevent everything that could possibly go wrong for your child and feel personally held responsible for, everything going smoothly. There's just so much that is that relinquishing of control that we are so not excited about letting happen. But it's not a choice. It's happening. It's how do we support ourselves through that mental gymnastics as well. But I think from there, we can start to move into kind of wrapping up because there's so much to process already. Remind all my listeners how they can find and connect with the podcast and you guys.
Okay, Brittany is looking at me, so I'll go.
She does better than I do on this. Go.
Oh my gosh, you're funny. So the podcast is on all the players. So if you search Moms Talk Autism, you'll find it anywhere you listen to your podcasts. And then we are most active on Instagram, and that's at Moms Talk Autism. We're pretty easy to find. We're not much on Facebook. Like whatever translates from Instagram to Facebook will be there, but we don't ever just post on on Facebook. So don't find us there. And then you can email us at hello@momstalkautism, which momstalkautism.com is the website.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll have all those links in the show notes to easily click to. But then I have to ask you the question I ask every guest that comes on Failing Motherhood, which is, how are you the parent your kid and kids need?
Brittany, go.
Dang it. I should have taken the other one first. Okay. I am the parent that my kids need because of the experiences I have had so far raising them. I am harder because of the experiences I have. I'm calloused. I've got some bumps and some hard spots on me now. I've got a thicker skin. I'm also softer because of the experiences I've been. I am able to really empathize, and if you are struggling and you've gone through maybe some of the similar things that I've gone through, I get it. I understand. And I don't know if I would be able to do that if I hadn't gone through the things I had, if I didn't have my own neurodiverse children. It's really, really hard to kind of get it without being in the work. And just again, I really celebrate those little joys more. I really try to, at least, because they can be few and far between. And they are very precious to me because they don't come on very often, especially with Austin right now. It's a struggle. When he wakes up in the morning and he's all sleepy-eyed and snuggly and warm, and he reaches out his arm and he grabs me around the waist because he's bigger than I am. Literally, he's bigger, taller, stronger, heavier, all the things. And he pulls me in to a little snuggle sesh and he just buries his nose in my hair. And we just, even if it's just a couple of minutes, I savor that as much as I possibly can. So that's probably how I can be there for my kids, is trying to celebrate those little things and just really absorb each experience as it comes.
Yeah, I like that. And we like snuggly Austin too, because sometimes she'll Marco us when he's being super snuggly.
It's pretty great. You're in the Austin Club when you get hair sniffs If he grabs your head in a headlock and he sniffs you and snuggles you, then you are in. Welcome to the club.
And he's massive. He's massive. So he literally has her in a headlock, but it's the sweetest, cuddliest little headlock you've ever seen. Yeah.
It's WWE style. Yeah.
So I think for me, this journey has made me much more self-aware, much less judgmental. I am much more open-minded than I think if I would not have gone through this, I would have been the mom at Target looking at you if your kid was acting out. That would have been me.
You wouldn't have said anything, but you would have given a look.
I would have been like, something needs some discipline. Yeah. So it's almost like God put this, to me, like, you need to learn a lesson, Shannon.
Right.
And I think that has made me more like self-aware of my children. Before Gracie, if you would have told me that my child could be having a complete meltdown, losing her mind, and I would be able to kneel down and like hold her hand with like compassion and empathy and look in her eyes and talk to her, I would never have believed you, because I was a pretty like disciplinarian parent before Gracie. So like the fact that I have that now, and I only have that because of her, like she has taught me that. And grace, like I have learned that I have to give myself grace. I am doing the very best that I can. And I have to hope that when my kids are older, they will look back and that they will see that she really did the best that she could. And so for me, I just really hold on to that belief. The other reason is I watch TikTok. No, I'm just kidding. So I did actually watch a TikTok. Brittany's like, I roll. Hey, the other day it said I had 0 minutes in a week. So nobody try to find me on TikTok. I don't ever post there ever. But there was this like neuroscientist or something on TikTok one day. And if it's on TikTok, it must be true. But he was talking about how a 6-second hug is enough to release the endorphins in you that will like calm you down. And so that is one thing that I have started with my kids, is if I feel like they're getting really wound up, or like every night before Gracie goes to bed, Maya got her anxiety levels from me. I'm sorry, Maya, my oldest. But like if Maya's like wrapped up, we'll do a 6-second hug. And like every night before Gracie goes to bed, we do a 6-second hug. And I tell her 6-second hug. And she like jumps in my lap and I count. And I'm like 4. And then I say 5 like 19 times because I never want to let go. Like I never want to hit 6. And she'll laugh and she'll say 6, and she'll jump off out of my lap because I've said 5 19 times. But it's just those little moments. Like when you look back at your childhood, what are the things that you remember from your parents, right? It's not usually that huge grand thing they did one time. It's like those little tiny things that they did that like made you feel safe and secure, right? And so I think those are the things that matter the most.
Oh, so good. So good. Yes. We need to hear that on repeat. And it matters. It does matter so much. It's the little things. And that's adorable. And it'll be such a good memory for both of you guys. So thank you guys so much for your vulnerability, for being able to take the time, for being able to share your first-person experience and be able to hold that space on the platform for all the families that you do. We really, really appreciate it. So needed. Thank you so much for joining us on Failing Motherhood.
Thank you for having us.
It's been great. Yeah,
of course. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Failing Motherhood. Your kids are so lucky to have you. If you loved this episode, take a screenshot right now and share it in your Instagram stories and tag me. If you're loving the podcast, be sure that you've subscribed and leave a review so we can help more moms know that they are not alone if they feel like they're failing motherhood on a daily basis. And if you're ready to transform your relationship with your strong-willed child and invest in the support you need to make it happen, schedule your free consultation using the link in the show notes. I can't wait to meet you. Thanks for coming on this journey with me. I believe in you, and I'm cheering you on.